Hello and welcome to part 29 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.6. In this video I'm going to be covering how to switch between multiple cameras. What am I talking about? Well, if you've ever watched a movie or animation, and I'm assuming that you have, you'll know that the entire movie is not shot from one camera or one camera angle. Obviously, they are always switching between different camera angles, and so when they shot the movie, they actually did the scene multiple times. The actors performed the scene multiple times, and they shot, in most cases, the scene, they moved the camera around and shot the scene from multiple angles, close-up angles, long shots, extreme close-ups, etc. And so this is a good thing to do in an animation as well. So as you can see in my scene right here, we have two characters sitting at a table. They're staring at each other. In fact, they're having a staring competition. And there are, in fact, 6 cameras in my scene. There is the camera that we are looking through right now. There is 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus the one that we're looking through. So that's 6 cameras in total. And I have this animation rendered out, so I'll go ahead and play that now, and we'll kind of go through it, and then we'll talk about exactly how to switch between cameras automatically. If we look in my scene, I'll just kind of scrub through it. We're looking through the first camera, but you'll notice something new. When I keep on scrubbing, it automatically switches to the next camera. So this is the over-the-shoulder shot, and then the next over-the-shoulder shot, then the close-up, and the extreme or close-up, and then the really extreme close-up, and that's the animation. So I'm going to go play it through the rendered version. When you're starting off any scene, it's a good idea to start with an establishing wide shot, which means it includes all the characters, or most of the characters, and it's not very close up. That kind of gives the user a chance to see what's going on. The next shot is an over-the-shoulder shot. That's kind of a normal thing when two characters are talking. They often shoot over one character's shoulder looking at the other person. This is a medium shot because it includes the character's waist up. There's the opposing shot, so over the other character's shoulder. And a close-up of the character's face. More close-up, almost an extreme close-up. And that is an extreme close-up. So this scene has 6 shots and 6 cameras, and Blender automatically switches between the cameras when you render out. So you don't have to render out at different times. You can just set up the cameras in the animation and then leave your computer after you've pressed animation. So let's get started. I have a scene that has no cameras. I believe it is cafe scene _start, and it's the exact same scene, although it has no cameras, so I can press 0 on my keyboard and nothing happens. So before we get started, because we are making an animation, I'm going to split my window up by grabbing this little shaded area at the top of my window and drag down. And then we'll click this little icon and turn the bottom window into a timeline. Because we're working with animation, it's a good idea to have a dope sheet as well, so I'll do the same thing. And maybe I'll leave this one as the... Actually, no. I think I'll make that one the timeline, and this one will be the dope sheet, which lets us move keyframes and delete keyframes, etc. And we need a camera. So I'm going to press 7 to go to the top view. Maybe I'll turn on my display of my keys, so you know what I'm pressing most of the time. I'll press Shift A and add a camera. We'll press 3 to go to the side, and we will rotate the camera and kind of put it right there. This is going to be our establishing camera. And so I will press 0 to go through, or to see through the camera. And now if you watch my last video, part 28, I believe, on essential camera tips, you'll know that if you open up this side panel by pressing N, you can check the little box that says lock camera to view, which means when you're looking through the camera, you can zoom in and out, and it'll actually move the camera, which is a really handy feature. And if you have rotate around selected object turned on in your file preferences, you can have an object selected, and you can kind of rotate around that object, or orbit around it rather, in your scene. So I'm going to kind of zoom out. We're making an establishing shot here. I also have a ground plane and some kind of mountains, fake mountains in the background, but I'll just leave those hidden in my outliner window. And so this is where the camera is going to start off. We're going to have a really quickly animated camera. So I'm going to turn on my record button in my timeline, select the camera, and press I to insert a keyframe. And we're going to insert a locrot scale, location rotation scale keyframe. Let's go to frame 60 or so. I'm not really spending any time figuring out how long this should take or how slow I should move my camera in. We're going to press with the camera selected I again, whoops, your mouse has to be in the 3D view window or in your timeline or dope sheet. And local rotate scale again, except we are going to zoom in this time. I'm going to kind of rotate the camera down by selecting the table, and maybe we will move that up. So we've just made an animation of the, oops, I need you to press I after I move the camera, not before. So we've just made an animation, I believe. That didn't work for some reason. Oh, that's right. I, local rotate scale. There we go. I didn't have the camera selected. Okay, so we made an animation of the camera zooming in or moving towards. That's just kind of establishing what's going on. Maybe I'll move the camera down a little bit and then select the camera and press I, local rotate scale. Okay, so that is the first shot. The next shot is going to be an over-the-shoulder shot, looking at either the red guy over the purple guy's shoulder or the opposite. It doesn't matter. So I'll press 7, put my 3D cursor right there, because wherever you have your 3D cursor is where objects get placed. And I will add a second camera. You'll notice a slight difference in appearance between this camera and this camera. Not the fact that one's pointed down, but that one has a black triangle above it and one has just an outlined triangle above it. And that's because this camera, our establishing shot camera, is the active camera in the scene. The active camera in your scene always has a filled in triangle. The other cameras that are not the active camera do not have it filled in. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to press 3 to go to my side view, rotate that up, go to my top view, rotate that around. We're making an over-the-shoulder shot. Usually over-the-shoulder shots have I'm going to press Control 0 with that camera selected to make it the active camera. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. And so pressing Control 0 with the camera selected makes it the active camera. Now I have record turned on, so I'm going to undo a few times so my keyframes go away. No, that didn't work. Oh well. Having the record button on is dangerous, so I'm going to put my camera right about there and press Shift A and add a camera. There we go, record button is not turned on this time. I'm going to press 3, rotate it up with the R key, of course, 7, and rotate it that way. And so I'll press Control 0, and that'll make this the active camera. And because we have locked the camera view turned on, I can move my view in the camera, and it will move the actual camera. Over-the-shoulder shots normally have a more zoomed lens, so I can select the camera. And under the camera tab, I will change the focal length, which means the amount of zoom. I will turn it to maybe to about 70 or so. So it's a more zoomed lens, which means we can be farther away from the characters. Maybe even higher than that, maybe even 100 millimeter zoomed lens. I'll select, because we're looking at the character's head, I'll select the head bone in pose mode. So with the bone selected, I'm in pose mode, so I can select the individual bones. And let's say right about there. Okay, that's not the ideal shot. That's a little bit better. Right about there. Okay, that's going to be shot number 2. I'm going to make an almost identical shot, but we're going to make it over the other character's shoulder, pointing at the other character. So with the camera selected, Shift D and R to rotate. We're going to do almost the exact same thing. And with that camera selected, I'll press Control 0 to make it the active camera. This time we're looking over the opposite character's shoulder at the opposite character. And looks pretty good to me. Also, framing your scene, you can also, with your camera selected, under the camera tab, I believe, you can choose a composition guide. And this is a really good tip. I should have put this in my last video, but I did not. I forgot. You can choose between different guides. This is kind of going to guide you in making a well composed scene. One of the ones that is my favorite is the rule of thirds. So you can check thirds, and it'll put the thirds approximately, although that one is a bit wider for some reason, guides to make you have a nicer scene. If I were to compose my scene like that, that would obviously not be a very good composure, because all this space in there is wasted. So I want to compose my scene nicely, right about there. It's also not a good idea to cut off the top of characters' heads like that. That looks weird. Okay, there is shot shot number 3. So we've got the wide shot from that camera, and then that over the shoulder shot, then that one. Now I'm going to go back over here, and I'm just going to duplicate that camera and move it a little bit, and we'll turn up the zoom because I know I want to do a more close-up, extreme close-up of the character's eyes. So I will change the focal length to maybe 140, and I'll press Control 0 with that camera selected to make it the active camera. Pretty good, although we want to zoom in a little bit more perhaps. Maybe not. You'll see in most movies, if you actually sit there and analyze while you watch a scene, that when intensity is heating up between two characters, quite often what you'll see is the camera angle start wide, so that the first shot will be wide, and then progressively the shots will get closer and closer into the character's eyes, and then they'll pretty much stay there until some sort of tension breaks or some kind of larger action happens. Okay, so I think that was good. We'll duplicate that camera and rotate it to about right there, and I'll press Shift 0 to look through. It's pretty good, although maybe I want to do something like that so that you can still see this character that is in the scene. And one more time, I'm going to take that camera and we'll just move it a little bit. We're going to turn the focal length up to 160. I know I'm going pretty fast, but I'm just positioning cameras here and changing their amount of zoom or their focal length. And let's press Control 0. And I'm going to in fact turn this up to 180 or so, maybe even 220. Let's go for broke. Okay, and with that bone selected, I can now rotate around that bone, and we will get, I just zoomed in or moved the camera a little bit there by scrolling up. Okay, so we've got our shots. Now, how do we automatically switch between the different cameras? Well, we have to decide which camera is going to be the first camera in our scene. And because I talked about it several times, and we know that this first camera is animated, and it's going to be our establishing shot, we're going to make that the first shot in our scene. So what we're actually going to be doing here to switch between the cameras is by making, or we will be making markers in the timeline that will be indicating to Blender when to switch between the different cameras. Right now, that camera is the active camera, just because it's the last camera that we looked through. So I'm going to select the first camera and press Control 0. That's going to make it the active camera. I'm also going to put my timeline at frame 1, and I'm going to press with my mouse in the timeline, I'm going to press M, and that's going to make a marker, and it's called F_01, which means frame 01. Not quite sure why they name it the frame that it's on, but you can actually, with the marker selected, so you can press A to deselect the marker and right click on it to select it, or if you have many markers, you can press A and A to select them all. In this case, we only have one, so I believe if you go to the marker menu, you can go to rename marker, and I'm going to call this one establishing. Did I spell that right? Yes, I did. Shot, and press enter. And so now we know that marker is going to switch us to this first camera. Now it's on frame 1, so we're just telling it to start on this camera. So how do we link this camera to this marker? In other words, how do we make this marker tell Blender that when we get to it, in other words, start on frame 1 with it, to be at this camera? Well, we have to, I'm going to press A to deselect all, so I have nothing selected. Excuse me. I'm going to select the camera, and then with the marker selected and my mouse in this window, I'm going to press Control B. And that means bind this camera to this marker. So now, this marker will tell Blender when the playhead, the green bar, gets to it, that it's going to switch to that camera. Now, more importantly, when we get to frame 60, there just happens to be a keyframe there. Maybe, in fact, we'll go to frame 50 only. So we're at frame 50, we wanted to switch to camera number 2, which I believe is that camera right there. So at frame 50, I'm going to press M with my mouse on the timeline, make a marker. We're going to call this marker, so we're going to go with the marker selected. We'll go to marker, rename. I'm going to call this one first over shoulder. I'm not naming these with any kind of convention really, but you can if you want, or you don't have to name them at all. So with that second camera selected, I'm going to, and the marker selected, I'm going to press Control B, and that'll bind it or bind this camera to that marker. So you'll see now that from frame 1 to frame 49, we're looking through the first camera, but as soon as we get to this second marker at frame 50, it'll switch to that next camera. On we move. I'm going to actually go to my top view, because we don't actually need to look through the cameras. Actually, that's the wrong camera. So we can switch it. I'm going to select that camera, and because we have this marker selected, I can press Control B, and now I have bound it to a different camera. I've switched which camera it's bounded to. So if I press 0, actually right there, 0, with my mouse in the 3D viewport, we'll now see that it switches to the right camera. I switched to the wrong one. Okay, so at frame, let's say frame 70, we'll make a third marker, press M with your mouse over the timeline, select the next camera, in this case it's the other over-the-shoulder shot, and with that one selected, we can press Control B, and that will bind this camera to f_70. We'll go to frame 90, press M, and with this camera selected, we're going to bind this camera to marker frame 90. So with this camera selected and the marker that we want to have it assigned to, we can press Control B, which is bind. You can also, with the same thing selected, you can also go to, I believe, View Bind Camera to Markers, Control B. I like the shortcuts. So, did I press Control B? I'll just press it again. Okay. On to frame 110. We're going to select that camera, press M to make a new marker with our mouse in the timeline, and then press Control B to bind it. Go 20 frames later. Obviously, I'm just going 20 frames at a time, but that's probably way too short. That's less than a second for each shot, which is really, unless it's like two characters fighting or dancing, which often means that there is really fast camera switches, then you won't want to do 20 frame camera switches like I am. M, with that camera selected, now I'll press Control B, and I believe we just have 2 more shots. Let's actually see how this is going. So I'm going to put my mouse in the 3D viewport, press 0. So we started off at this camera angle, it zooms in, so it's an animated camera. We switch to that camera angle, looking at the purple guy, looking at the red guy, looking at the purple guy closer up, red guy closer up, and then we haven't assigned a new camera angle to that marker. So I'm going to press 7, and I believe we want to switch to that one. So I'll press Control M, or nope. I guess that's actually a shortcut for renaming the marker. Yeah, Control M. With the marker selected, I can press Control M, and it will let me name that marker to, I'm going to call this one Extreme Close Perp. Whatever. Okay. Control B to bind it. 20 frames later, we'll select this one, which is going to be the final shot, that camera. Press M, and then press Control B, and then I'll maybe press Control M to rename it, now that I've learned how to rename it quickly. And final extreme close red. Enter. Enter. There we go. So, if I press 0, it'll go to whatever is the active camera at any given frame that I'm at with on my playhead, and we can scrub through, and we will have automatic camera switching. Excellent. Now that you have your automatic camera switching, you can press render animation, assuming that all the other settings are correct, and it will render out through whatever camera it's supposed to. You can also grab these, so if you want to mix these up, change the order of your cameras, you can select a marker by right-clicking on it and press G to move it. That's just the grab, as normal. And the only disadvantage of this system is if you want to see what the same frame looks like from a different camera, you can select like any other camera. Let's say that we're looking through this camera, which we are at this frame, but we want to see what the same part in the animation looks like from a different camera. You can select a different camera and press Control Control 0 rather, and you will switch to that camera. Now, does it automatically or permanently switch to that one? No, it does not. So if you ever want to see what the same section in your animation looks like through a different camera, you can always switch to that camera temporarily just by pressing Control 0, but the marker still does take prevalence. Okay, so that does work. So you can switch between cameras automatically, so you can render out automatically. This is a really handy thing to do. Ideally, you would have, or Blender would have, a kind of a preview of all of the different cameras from in kind of like preview windows, kind of like Final Cut Pro 10 does, but it doesn't have that yet. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So that's camera switching. I hope that helped. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.